The moment my girlfriend casually spent $480 on a weekend shopping trip, I smiled and told her it looked great. What I didn't tell her was that I had exactly $17.43 left in my bank account. And I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether we had different incomes and started wondering whether we had different definitions of love. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 22 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood what a real relationship looked like. People always say love isn't about money, and I still believe that's true. But when one person is quietly carrying all the weight while the other barely notices, money stops being the problem. It becomes a reflection of something much bigger. Olivia and I met during our sophomore year at a community college outside Portland, Oregon. Neither of us came from wealthy families. We were both working part-time jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, and trying to figure out what adulthood was supposed to look like. Back then, our dates were simple. We'd grab burgers from a food truck, split the fries because it was cheaper, then spend hours talking in my old Honda while watching the city lights reflect across the river. Those nights never felt cheap. If anything, they felt perfect. We were building memories instead of worrying about money. A few months into our relationship, Olivia's work hours were suddenly cut. She tried acting like everything was fine, but I could tell something was wrong. One evening, after dropping her off at her apartment, she stayed in the passenger seat instead of getting out. She stared at her phone for almost a minute before quietly saying, "I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills this month." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Without thinking twice, I reached into my wallet. It wasn't much, just enough cash to get me through the rest of the week. Still, I folded the bills and placed them in her hand. She immediately tried giving them back. "No, Ethan, I can't take this," I smiled. "You would have done the same for me." She looked me straight in the eyes. "I promise. If our situations are ever reversed, I'll never let you struggle alone." At the time, I believed her without hesitation, and honestly, I never expected life to test that promise so soon. I didn't think much about that promise for the next year. Life kept moving. Olivia eventually found another job, and things slowly started improving for her. She wasn't making a fortune, but she no longer had to choose between paying her phone bill and buying groceries. Seeing her smile again made every extra shift I had worked feel worth it. Whenever she thanked me for helping her through those rough months, I'd always say the same thing: "That's what partners do." I truly believed that. I wasn't keeping score. I wasn't expecting to be paid back. I simply assumed that if life ever put me in the same position, we'd face it together. Then everything changed. The regional grocery store where I'd worked for nearly 3 years was bought by a larger company. Within weeks, overtime disappeared. My schedule was cut from almost 40 hours a week to barely 25. At first, I wasn't too worried. I updated my resume, applied for a few jobs, and figured something better would come along. It didn't. Weeks turned into months. Every interview ended the same way. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." I'd leave each interview telling myself the next one would be different. Meanwhile, my savings were disappearing faster than I wanted to admit. I stopped ordering coffee before work, canceled every streaming subscription except the cheapest one, started walking whenever I could instead of driving, little changes that added up. Or at least I hoped they would. Around that same time, Olivia got a call from her dad. He owned a construction supply company just outside the city and needed someone to help manage customer accounts. The pay was incredible: health insurance, paid vacation, a retirement plan, and a salary that was almost 3 times what I was bringing home. I couldn't have been happier for her. The night she got the offer, I picked up her favorite takeout and surprised her after work. She practically ran into my arms. "I got it. I knew you would." She laughed so hard she almost dropped the food. "We're finally moving forward." That word stayed in my head. Because even though it was her job, she talked about it like it was our future. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. She was excited about work. She bought a few new outfits because she wanted to look professional. Then she replaced her old laptop. A few days later, she upgraded her phone. I never questioned any of it. She had earned that money, she deserved to enjoy it, but my own situation kept getting worse. One Friday afternoon, my manager pulled me into the office. "We have to reduce your hours again." I already knew what he was going to say before he finished the sentence. I nodded, pretended it was okay. Then sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes after work, staring at the steering wheel. For the first time in years, I had no idea how I was going to pay next month's rent. I didn't tell Olivia. Not because I didn't trust her, because I didn't want her to worry. Instead, I convinced myself I'd fix everything before she even noticed. I started selling things, my old gaming console, my camera. Even the watch my grandfather had given me after high school. Each sale bought me another week, another bill, another chance to catch up, but eventually, there was nothing left to sell. One evening, Olivia came over after work carrying 3 shopping bags. You have to see what I bought. She spread everything across my couch. New shoes, designer perfume. A leather handbag she'd been talking about for weeks. She looked genuinely excited. What do you think? I smiled. They look great. She hugged me. I knew you'd like them. I smiled back. Then quietly glanced toward my kitchen. The refrigerator was almost empty. I hadn't gone grocery shopping in over a week. That night, as she talked excitedly about work, my stomach growled loud enough for both of us to hear. She laughed. You skipped lunch again? Yeah, work was busy. That wasn't true. I skipped lunch because I couldn't afford to keep buying it. She never questioned my answer, and I never corrected it. At that moment, I still believed she would eventually notice what was really happening. I just didn't realize how much longer I'd keep waiting. The following Monday started like every other Monday. I woke up before sunrise, checked my bank account, and immediately wished I hadn't. $31.82. That was everything I had until Friday. Rent had already cleared. My phone bill was due in 3 days, and my gas tank was sitting just above empty. I closed the banking app before it could ruin the rest of my morning. At work, I tried to keep myself busy. When lunch came around, everyone else headed to the break room. I stayed behind. One of my coworkers, Marcus, noticed. You coming? I shook my head. I ate before I left. It was a lie. Marcus looked at me for a second before reaching into his lunch bag. My wife packed too much again. Help me out. He handed me half of his sandwich like it was no big deal. I wanted to refuse. Instead, I quietly thanked him. It's funny how a complete stranger noticed I hadn't eaten, while the person I loved never seemed to. That evening, Olivia texted me. Dinner tonight, my treat. Just kidding face with tears of joy. Meet me at 7. I stared at the message for a few seconds. The just kidding was obviously meant as a joke. Still, it landed differently than she probably intended. I replied with a thumbs up and drove to the restaurant. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't somewhere I would have chosen with my budget. When I arrived, Olivia was already there, scrolling through her phone. She smiled the moment she saw me. There you are, traffic. She leaned over and kissed my cheek before showing me something on her screen. I finally booked that girl's weekend to Seattle. Oh, yeah. We found a really nice hotel. It's going to be so much fun. That's awesome. She talked excitedly for almost 10 minutes. I listened. I genuinely wanted her to be happy. Then the waitress arrived. We ordered. For the first time in weeks, I found myself checking the prices before deciding what I could afford. Olivia ordered without even looking. When the food arrived, we laughed about random things, joked about college memories, and for a little while, everything felt normal again, until the check landed on the table. Without thinking, my hand moved toward it. Before I could pick it up, Olivia smiled. You're too sweet. She slid the check closer to me. It wasn't rude, it wasn't demanding. It was almost automatic, like we'd both accepted this was simply how things worked. I forced a smile. Yeah, my debit card went through, barely. As we walked back to the parking lot, I checked my balance. $4.16. $4.16. I stood there for a second, staring at the screen. Olivia was talking about a TV show she'd started watching, completely unaware that I was mentally calculating whether I had enough gas to get to work for the rest of the week. That night I couldn't sleep. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was confused because this wasn't the Olivia I thought I knew, or maybe it was. Maybe I had just never been in a position to see it before. The next afternoon, my phone rang. It was my landlord. Hey, Ethan, just wanted to remind you that rent is increasing next month. I closed my eyes. How much? Another 150. After hanging up, I sat in my car for almost half an hour. I had been applying for jobs every single day. Nothing. I picked up my phone and opened my messages with Olivia. For the first time in our relationship, I started typing something I'd never imagined saying. Can I ask you for a favor? My thumb hovered over the send button. Then I deleted the entire message. I told myself I shouldn't have to ask. She knew my hours had been cut. She knew I wasn't buying anything for myself anymore. She had seen my nearly empty refrigerator. She had heard me say, I can't afford it, more than once, if she wanted to help. Wouldn't she have offered by now? I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Deep down, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that avoiding the conversation wasn't protecting our relationship anymore. It was slowly breaking it. The next few days were some of the longest I'd had in years. Every morning started the same way. I checked my bank balance, looked at the number for a few seconds, then pretended everything was normal. By Friday afternoon, payday finally arrived. The money hit my account and disappeared almost instantly. Rent, utilities, car insurance, phone bill. By the time every payment had cleared, I was left with just enough to survive another week. It felt like I was running on a treadmill that kept getting faster. No matter how hard I worked, I never moved forward. That weekend, Olivia invited me to spend Saturday with her. "We're going to the outlet mall," she said excitedly over the phone. "I've been waiting for this sale all month." I almost said no, not because I didn't want to spend time with her, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. She'd shop. I'd stand there pretending price tags didn't make me anxious, but I missed her, so I went. The parking lot was packed. Inside, people walked from store to store carrying colorful shopping bags. Olivia looked happier than I'd seen her in weeks. "Oh my God," she laughed, grabbing my hand. "Come on." For the next 2 hours, I followed her from one store to another. She tried on jackets, sneakers, dresses, perfume. She'd step out of the fitting room, spin around and ask, "What do you think? You look amazing." And she did, every single time. By the end of the afternoon, she'd bought enough bags that I had to carry half of them. As we walked toward the parking lot, we passed a small electronics store. In the front window sat a pair of work headphones, nothing fancy, just a comfortable pair I'd been looking at for months. Mine had been cutting in and out for weeks, making it difficult to take calls during my shifts. I stopped for a second. Olivia noticed. "You like those? Yeah, why don't you get them?" I smiled awkwardly. "They're a little out of my budget right now," she nodded. "Oh," then she kept walking, that was it. "No, do you need them?" "No, I can help. Not even maybe next paycheck. Just, oh." I stood there for another second before catching up. For some reason, that tiny moment hurt more than anything else that had happened over the past few months. It wasn't about the headphones, it was about what they represented, a need she knew I had. One she could have solved without even thinking twice. Instead, she simply walked away. Later that evening, we stopped for coffee. The cashier rang everything up and turned the payment terminal toward us. Without saying a word, Olivia looked at me. It was the same look she'd given me dozens of times before. The silent expectation. I reached into my pocket, then stopped. I knew if I paid, I'd have almost nothing left until next Friday. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I didn't move. Olivia looked at me. "You okay?" I took a slow breath. Then, as calmly as I could, I asked a question I'd been holding in for months. "Would you mind getting this one?" She blinked. Almost like she hadn't expected those words to ever come out of my mouth. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she reached for her wallet. But the expression on her face wasn't what I expected. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't anger. It was confusion, as if she genuinely couldn't understand why I was asking. And in that moment, I realized the conversation I'd been avoiding was no longer optional. It was finally about to begin. Olivia handed the cashier her credit card without saying a word, the receipt printed. She picked up her coffee, waited for mine, and together we walked back to the car. The entire drive was unusually quiet. Normally, she would have been telling me about work or laughing at something she'd seen online. This time, she just stared out the passenger side window. About 10 minutes later, she finally spoke. "That was different." I kept my eyes on the road. "What was? You've never asked me to pay before." "I know." Another long silence filled the car. When we pulled into the parking lot outside her apartment, neither of us got out. She turned toward me. "Is something going on?" I almost said no. The same answer I'd been giving for months, but I was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending. Exhausted from acting like everything was okay. So for the first time, I told her the truth. My hours were cut again. Her eyebrows lifted. "I didn't know that." "I know. I thought it was just temporary. It was supposed to be." I took out my phone, opened my banking app, and placed it in her hand. "I have less than $40 left." She looked at the screen, then back at me. "I didn't realize it was this bad. I've been trying to handle it myself. Why didn't you tell me?" I let out a quiet laugh. "I thought I already had." She looked confused. "What do you mean? I've told you I couldn't afford things. I stopped buying clothes. You've seen my refrigerator. You know I sold my gaming console." I figured you'd connect the dots. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her hands. "I honestly thought you just didn't like asking for help." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. "Liv, I never wanted you to ask. I wanted you to want to help." Her eyes slowly met mine. "I helped you because I loved you. I never kept score. I never expected you to pay me back. but I believed that if our situations were ever reversed, I wouldn't have to face them alone. Words hung in the air between us. She looked like she wanted to respond. Instead, she started crying, not loudly, just quietly enough that I almost didn't notice. "I'm sorry," it was barely a whisper. "I didn't see it," I swallowed. "I don't know how you couldn't." She covered her face for a moment. "My dad always handled everything at home. My mom never worried about bills. If someone needed something, they asked. I guess I grew up believing that if nobody asked, everything was fine." I listened without interrupting. It wasn't an excuse. It sounded more like someone realizing in real time that the way they'd always looked at money wasn't the only way. She reached across the center console and took my hand. "I've been thinking like we're two separate people, when you've been thinking like we're a team." For the first time in months, I felt like she finally understood what had been hurting me. But understanding something, and changing because of it, aren't always the same thing, and I had no idea which one was about to happen. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The only sound inside the car was the rain tapping softly against the windshield. Olivia still hadn't let go of my hand. "I don't want you to think I don't love you," she said quietly. I know you love me." I paused before continuing, "but love isn't always what people say. Sometimes it's what they notice." She lowered her eyes. That sentence seemed to stay with her. After another minute, she reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She took out one of her credit cards and held it toward me. "Take it." I looked at the card but didn't move. "Liv, please. If you need groceries, gas, anything, just use it." I slowly shook my head. "I don't want your credit card." Her expression fell. "You don't know. What I needed wasn't a card. It was to know you saw me." She looked away, blinking back more tears. For the first time since we'd started dating, neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, she broke the silence. "What do we do now?" I thought about that question for a long time. I think we have to figure out whether we see relationships the same way." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means when you were struggling, I never thought that's her problem. I thought, how do we get through this together?" I took a slow breath. "But these past few months, I've felt like I've been fighting alone." She wiped her eyes. "I never wanted you to feel that way. I believe you, but intentions don't change what happened." She nodded without arguing. For the first time in months, she wasn't defending herself. She was listening. A few days passed after that conversation. Things felt different. She texted me more often, asked how work was going, even checked whether I'd eaten lunch, small things. Things that should have happened long before. Then on Wednesday evening, she called. "Can you come over after work?" Her voice sounded nervous. Sure. When I arrived, the smell of homemade pasta filled the apartment. She had lit candles. The table was already set for two. "I wanted to cook," she said with a shy smile. "You've always cooked for me." I thought it was my turn. We ate, laughed a little, and for the first time in weeks, everything felt almost normal again. After dinner, she disappeared into her bedroom for a minute. When she came back, she placed a plain white envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" "Open it." I looked inside. There was cash. More cash than I'd had in my account in months. I immediately pushed it back toward her. "I can't take this. It's not charity." She spoke before I could interrupt. "It's me finally showing up the way you showed up for me." I stared at the envelope. Part of me wanted to accept it. Another part of me couldn't because deep down, I still wasn't sure whether this was coming from her heart or from guilt, and those are two very different things. I looked at the envelope for several long seconds before sliding it back across the table. Olivia frowned. "You're not even going to count it?" I slowly shook my head. "It isn't about the amount." "Then what is it about?" I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. "If I take this tonight, I don't want it to be because you feel guilty." She looked confused. "What if I don't? Then tell me why you're giving it to me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared down at the table, tracing the edge of the envelope with her finger. Finally, she spoke. "Do you remember the night my electricity almost got shut off?" I nodded immediately. "Of course, you came over after working a 10-hour shift. You were exhausted. I never asked you for money. You just noticed." I smiled faintly. "I remember." She swallowed hard. "I've been thinking about that night ever since our conversation in your car." She looked up at me, her eyes already beginning to fill with tears. "You didn't help me because I asked. You helped me because you couldn't stand seeing me struggle." I stayed quiet. I kept asking myself why I didn't do the same thing. She laughed bitterly. And I hated the answer. What was it? I got comfortable. The room went completely silent. "I got so used to you taking care of everything that I stopped paying attention. I assumed you had it handled because you always did." She wiped a tear from her cheek. And somewhere along the way, I stopped looking closely enough to notice that you were drowning. Those words hit me harder than any apology could have, because they sounded honest. Not rehearsed, not defensive, just honest. She slowly pushed the envelope toward me again. This isn't me trying to erase the last few months. I know I can't. This is me trying to be a better partner starting today. I looked at her for a long time, then I reached out. Not for the envelope, for her hand. I don't need you to fix everything overnight. I just needed to know we were still on the same team. She squeezed my hand tightly. We are, I promise. For the first time in months, I believe she meant it, but life has a strange way of testing promises. The very next morning, my phone rang while I was driving to work. It was an unknown number. Hello, hi, is this Ethan Brooks? Yes, I'm calling from Northwest Logistics. You interviewed with us last week. My heart immediately started racing. We'd like to offer you the position. For a second, I couldn't even speak. The salary was better, the hours were guaranteed, and the benefits were far beyond anything I'd ever had. After I hung up, I pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there. I should have felt relieved. Instead, one question kept running through my mind: if this job had come a month earlier. Would Olivia and I have ever had the conversation that changed everything? Or would I have spent years believing we saw love the same way, without ever knowing the truth? I called Olivia before I even pulled out of the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. Hey, everything okay? I couldn't stop smiling. I got it. There was a brief pause. The job? Yeah. For a split second, neither of us said anything. Then she screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Oh my God, Ethan. I knew you would. I laughed for what felt like the first time in months. I start in 2 weeks. I'm so proud of you. I'll see you tonight, she said. We're celebrating. When I arrived at her apartment that evening, the kitchen looked completely different. She had cooked my favorite meal from scratch, not because it was expensive. Because she remembered it was my favorite. That simple detail meant more to me than any gift ever could. During dinner, she kept asking questions about the new job. What will your schedule be? Will you still have weekends off? Do they offer health insurance? For the first time in a long while. It felt like she was planning our future with me, instead of simply talking about her own. After we finished eating, she walked into the bedroom and came back holding a small notebook. I've been working on something. She handed it to me. Inside were handwritten notes, a monthly budget. Our names at the top of the page. One column listed shared expenses, another listed savings goals. There was even a section titled Emergency Fund for both of us. I looked up at her. You made this? She nodded. I realized something after our conversation. What? I kept thinking about my money and your money. She took a deep breath. If we're serious about building a life together, we should at least start thinking about our goals. I slowly turned another page. There were ideas for future vacations. A plan to save for an apartment. Even a note reminding us to set aside money every month for birthdays and Christmas so neither of us would feel pressured. I smiled. This is actually really good, she laughed nervously. I watched way too many budgeting videos. For the first time in months, our conversation wasn't about who had paid for what. It was about where we wanted to be 5 years from now. As the night went on, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't realized I'd been unable to. The resentment I'd been carrying wasn't gone. But it finally felt like we were pulling in the same direction. Before I left, Olivia stopped me at the front door. Ethan, yeah, if you ever start struggling again. She paused. I don't want you to wait months before telling me. I smiled. Deal. She looked at me seriously. No, I mean it, and I'll promise you something too. I'll pay attention even when you don't say anything. I kissed her forehead. I'd like that. As I drove home, I couldn't help thinking that maybe we'd made it through the hardest part. Maybe honesty had saved us before it was too late. But the following Sunday, something happened at a family dinner that made me question whether our biggest challenge had really been between us, or whether it had been waiting somewhere else all along. The following Sunday, Olivia invited me to her parents' house for dinner. Normally, I enjoyed spending time with her family. Her mom was warm and welcoming, always making sure everyone had enough to eat. Her younger brother had a sarcastic sense of humor that somehow made every conversation funnier. The only person I never felt completely comfortable around was her father, Richard. He wasn't rude, at least, not in an obvious way. He was the kind of man who measured people by their careers, their income, and the car they drove. The moment you walked into a room, it felt like he had already decided how much respect you deserved. As Olivia and I pulled into the driveway, she reached over and squeezed my hand. You okay? Yeah, you seem nervous. I forced a smile. Just tired. The truth was, I had a feeling this dinner wasn't going to be as ordinary as she made it sound. Inside, everyone greeted us warmly. The smell of grilled steak filled the house. For a while, everything felt relaxed. We laughed, talked about movies. Her mom asked me about my new job. Olivia couldn't stop smiling every time someone congratulated me. Then Richard walked in from the backyard carrying a tray of burgers. He sat down at the head of the table and looked directly at me. "So, I hear you finally found a better-paying job." I nodded. "I did. Good." He took a bite of his food before continuing. "A man should always be able to provide." The table suddenly became very quiet. I noticed Olivia glance at her dad. "Dad," but he wasn't finished. "I've always believed financial responsibility falls on the man's shoulders." I put my fork down. "I think responsibility should be shared." He smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind that says you're young, you'll learn. That's not how the real world works. Before I could answer, Olivia spoke. "Actually, I disagree." Everyone turned toward her. She looked directly at her father. "When Ethan was doing better than me, he helped without making me feel ashamed." She paused. "When our situations changed, I didn't do the same." Her father frowned. So, I was wrong." The room went completely silent. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't trying to protect herself. She was telling the truth, right in front of her family. I spent months assuming he'd figure things out on his own. He never complained. He never demanded anything. He just quietly carried the weight. She looked at me. And I didn't notice until it almost damaged our relationship. Her father leaned back in his chair. "I still don't think a woman should be expected to support a man." Olivia didn't hesitate. "I wasn't supporting a man, I was supporting my partner, and there's a difference." No one spoke for several seconds, then her mother quietly smiled. "I think that's the healthiest thing I've heard all week." Even her younger brother nodded. Richard didn't argue again, he simply changed the subject. But I could tell by the expression on his face, he wasn't convinced. As we drove home that night, I looked over at Olivia. "You didn't have to say all of that," she smiled. "I know, but I wanted to. For months I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I'm done doing that." I reached over and held her hand, for the first time since this whole journey began. I wasn't wondering whether she loved me. I knew she did. The only question left was whether we'd learned enough from everything we'd been through to make sure we never ended up in that place again. Over the next few months, life slowly settled into a rhythm that felt peaceful, not perfect, just honest. I started my new job, and for the first time in nearly a year, I wasn't checking my bank account every morning with a knot in my stomach. The paycheck was better, the hours were stable. I could finally fill my gas tank without calculating how many miles I had left. I even bought the pair of work headphones I'd stared at through that store window months earlier. When I got home, Olivia noticed them immediately. "You finally bought them," I smiled. "Yeah." She looked at me for a second before laughing. "You know what's funny? What? Back then I could have bought those for you without even thinking." I nodded. "I know. I'm really sorry." I walked over and wrapped my arms around her. "I don't need another apology. I just need us to keep learning." She hugged me tighter. "We will." And for the first time, I believed our future wasn't built on promises anymore. It was built on actions. A few weeks later, we sat down together to review the budget notebook she'd made. Some months I contributed more, some months she did. Whenever one of us had an unexpected expense, the other stepped in without keeping score. No debates, no guilt, no silent resentment, just teamwork. Looking back, I realized something that took me almost 2 years to understand. The hardest part wasn't earning less than my girlfriend. It wasn't watching her buy things while I struggled. It wasn't even feeling invisible. The hardest part was believing that love automatically meant two people saw relationships the same way. It doesn't. Every person grows up with different ideas about money, generosity, and responsibility. Some people believe you should only help when someone asks. Others believe you should notice before they have to. Neither person is necessarily trying to hurt the other, but if you never talk about those differences, they quietly grow into resentment. One rainy evening, months after everything had changed, Olivia and I returned to the same little coffee shop where I'd asked, "Would you mind getting this one, this time?" We both reached for the bill. Then we looked at each other and laughed. "I've got it," she said. I smiled. "Next time's on me." She shook her head. "Or we could stop treating it like a competition." I laughed. "That's probably healthier." The cashier smiled as we walked away with our drinks. Outside, Olivia slipped her hand into mine. You know what? I'm glad you finally told me how you felt. I almost didn't. I know. She looked down for a moment. If you hadn't, I honestly don't think I would have realized what I was doing. I squeezed her hand, and if you hadn't listened, I don't think we'd still be together. She stopped walking, turned toward me, then kissed me right there in the middle of the sidewalk. People walked past without paying us any attention. For the first time in a long time, everything felt light. Because we had learned something neither of us would ever forget. A relationship isn't measured by who pays more, it's measured by who shows up when the other person needs them most, and sometimes the smallest act of support says, "I love you," louder than the most expensive gift ever could.